Hey guys! All right, so today we are going to be reading a fun story by one of my favorite authors. Today we're going to be reading this story, Who's That Knocking on Christmas Eve by Jan Brett. All right, I love Jan Brett. And so I'm wondering, have any of you guys read any books by Jan Brett before? Do you know any other books by Jan Brett? Some of our favorites at our house, one of them is The Mitten, The Gingerbread Baby. There's so many amazing books by Jan Brett. But today we're going to be focusing on Who's That Knocking on Christmas Eve. All right? Now, just by looking, I got a little glare on this. Just by looking at the cover, what do we think? Do we think that this book is going to be a fictional story or a nonfiction story? So what genre do we think? And we can tell just by looking at the front cover. Do we fiction or nonfiction? If you said fiction, you are correct, right? Because it looks like our polar bear has on clothes. And we don't normally have a character of a polar bear as the main character of a nonfiction story. All right? Now, let's look at some of these things. I want to tell you a little secret about one of my favorite things that Jan Brett does. Okay, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Okay, now, not only does she have, her illustrations are just gorgeous. I love reading Jan Brett books. But when we look, so we have Who's That Knocking on Christmas Eve? Now, the cool thing about Jan Brett is when we are reading one of her stories, every time on each page, she has these little cutout circles in her books that show kind of what's happening in different areas of the book. So we are concentrating just on this part of the book right now. But in other parts of the book, there's different things happening. And so each time when we flip the page, we can look at those little inserts and see kind of what's happening in different parts of the book. All right? So I have a question. Who do you think might be knocking on the door on Christmas Eve? So I'm going to give you a second to think about that. All right, so let's look at Who's That Knocking on Christmas Eve by Jan Brett. All right, here we go. High above the Arctic Circle in the land of ice and snow, the northern lights shimmer in the night like a curtain of color hanging from the sky. Okay. The air is so crisp in the northern place that one Christmas Eve long ago, a boy from Finnmark on his way to Oslo with his ice bear could see smoke curling from a far hut in the distance. He was cold and hungry, so he headed to it. Far off in another direction, someone else smelled the smoke, and even though he couldn't see it, he raced off to tell the others. Now, remember what I said. Looking at these cutouts in our book, okay, we see the house with the smoke, okay, and then in this picture, I'm going to try to get it a little closer to you. We see someone else that has smelled the smoke. All right, here we go. As the boy from Finnmark made his way towards the hut, Kyrie was inside feeding the fire that made the smoke, that roasted and baked the fine food. Delicious sausage and fish and tasty buns and cakes were all laid out on a pine table. Sweet porridge bubbled over by the fire, and the apple cider stayed cool on the window sill. So why did Kyrie jump at every creak in the sod roof? And why did she run to the window when an icicle fell in the snow? All right. It said that Kyrie is making porridge. Do we know of any other characters in any different stories that eat porridge? Think back to last week. The bears were eating porridge, weren't they? It was because in years past, on Christmas Eve, trolls came by when they smelled delicious aromas coming from the hut. They would pound on the door until it burst open, and they wouldn't leave until they had eaten up every bit of the Christmas Eve meal. No troll invasion this year, Kyrie's father had said. I'm going up the mountain to watch and chase them away. And off he had gone to stop the trouble before it began. All right, so we see the boy from Finnmark and his bear, and then we also see the dad who is working on stopping the trolls. So this year, Kyrie was alone in the hut when she heard a soft sound at the door. Knockety knock, knockety knock. Someone was out there, but surely it was too polite of a knock for it to be a troll. Kyrie went to the door and peeked out. All right, who do we think it was? There's Dad. There was the boy from Finnmark with his ice bear. Please let me inside to warm up, he said. I am on my way south to show off my bear for the townsfolk of Oslo. I've many frosty miles behind me and many more to go. Come in, Kyrie said, but I have to warn you that in years past our house has been invaded by a pack of hungry trolls. Trolls would be a welcome adventure, said the boy. So he came in, and the ice bear crawled under the warm stove and fell asleep. So here we see Kyrie is looking out the door, and here's where the bear fell asleep. Kyrie and the boy had just settled down in front of the fire when they heard, not so softly this time, knockety knock, knockety knock. There's no one home, the boy called out. He was certain it was trolls, so he pushed the big chest in front of the door. All right. Do you see any clues? Let's see. When all was quiet, Kyrie and the boy sat down in front of the fire again. Kyrie got to thinking, I wonder if the porridge is creamy enough, and she ladled a bit of it into the bowls for each of them. They had just raised their bowls when they heard a loud knockety knock, knockety knock. It was as if someone was pounding on the door with a big rock. No one at home, the boy from Finnmark shouted, and he ran to lock all the windows. Okay, so we see Dad is still looking for the trolls. What do we see in this picture? See some little tails. Why do you think the knocking keeps getting louder every time they do it? It was quiet again, but the delicious smells wafted around the hut. Kyrie got to thinking, is the sausage salty enough? She took a piece for herself and gave one to the boy. They had just raised their forks when they heard thunderous knockety knock, knockety knock. The hut shook and they heard a loud crack. It was the cellar trap door splintering open. Kyrie and the boy ran into the animal shed and pulled the door shut, just as a torrent of noisy trolls burst up from the cellar. All right, so we have the polar bear is still asleep, and Kyrie and the boy from Finnmark are running to hide. There were bat-eared trolls, there were bug-nosed trolls, and each troll was wilder and more raucous than the one before. They munched and grunted, shrieked and cackled, splashed the cider and crammed themselves with Christmas cakes. Then, when they were through stuffing themselves, they tumbled about, pinching each other, stamping on one another's toes, and tweaking their long snouts, which is how trolls have a good time. Now, think about the trolls' eating habits and their manners. How are they different from ours? Do we do all of that? We would get in trouble if we did all that at our table. But through the ruckus and din, the littlest troll spied the ice bear under the snow. He took the hot morsel of sausage he had been roasting in the fire and screeched, "Have a bit of sausage, kitty!" And he poked the sleeping bear's nose with it. What do you think is going to happen? The ice bear leapt up with a tremendous roar, his nose burning terribly. Growling, he chased the little troll and all the big trolls around the table, up the walls and out the windows. "Scratch them, kitty!" Kyrie and the boy cheered as they watched the trolls scramble off through the ice and snow, howling. Up on the hill, Kyrie's father heard the shouts, so he raced down on his skis. When he saw the trolls, Kyrie's father could tell in an instant that they wanted to be as far away from the little hut as they could be. "Goodbye, trolls!" he shouted as they disappeared up the mountain, and he skied home. "What a fine bear you have," he told the boy from Finnmark. "Thank you for scaring away those pesky trolls. You must come back next year for a real Christmas Eve feast on your way home from Oslo." And they all sat down for some porridge. A year later, Kyrie was on the mountain gathering wood to make a fire to cook their dinner for Christmas Eve when the littlest troll popped up from behind a snowbank. "Missy," he called in a high, crackly voice, "do you still have that kitty that sleeps under the stove?" "Oh, yes," Kyrie said, "only she has grown up into a big cat now, and she has 7 kittens, all larger and fiercer than herself." He screeched. "Then we won't be visiting your hut on Christmas Eve." And he disappeared into a huge snowdrift. All right. Why do you think Kyrie told him that the kitty was even bigger and had 7 other kittens? I think it was to scare him away, and I think that her plan worked, don't you? All right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed reading our reading of Who's That Knocking on Christmas Eve by Jan Brett.